All right, welcome to Lecture 2 for 939 Strategic Leadership, and continuing here, I should say Lecture 2, Module 1, continuing here to do our introduction to strategic leadership and just kind of talk a little bit about what it is. In a brief review, I don't know how long it's been between the two videos, but a brief review. I had put forth three premises. And premise one, leadership can and should occur at all levels within an organization. And so then strategic leadership should occur at all levels, can and should occur at all levels within an organization. And then the third one may be the most important in regards to strategic leadership, and it's this. A strategic leader should be influencing and developing others to think strategically and to be leaders themselves. And remember, if you're not doing that, then you don't meet the criteria, to be a strategic leader. You might be a strategic thinker. You might be a great strategist, a great planner, but you're not a strategic leader if you're not influencing others and helping to develop them to be strategic thinkers themselves. And I should probably pause here and say this. As I mentioned in the first video, I love strategy. I love to think about it, things like that. Some of us it's like any other ability, talent, or strength, or something like that. Some of us are more strategically oriented than others. Personality assessments, different kind of assessments like that can help show you that, whether it's like Gallup Strengths Finders or Myers-Briggs, or there was one we did years ago at State Farm called Colby. In the Colby, I remember there were four colors, and each one represented something. And green was a quick start. That's what it was called. And typically, and then I think red was the kind of planner strategy person. And I remember on our team, I was a really strong red. And then we had a couple people who were really strong greens. And it was great on our team because we balanced each other out. Because what would happen is a green, a quick start, like they get an idea and they're like, yeah, let's do it. And they just jump in. Ready, go, set is kind of their model. And whereas for me, it was more, all right, let's think through this and plan this out. And I needed to be a help to them so that they were thinking through things, and they needed to be a help to me because sometimes, those of us who are more strategy oriented, we may never actually go forward. It's like, okay, now we need to do something. So there's balance there within teams, but all of us can think strategically. So that's the one concern I always have with personality assessments or different assessments like that, because sometimes we can fall into the trap of, well, this is how I am. These are my colors, these are my numbers, this is my whatever. They all have little different gimmicks, and I'm not downplaying them. Understand that I think there's useful information there, but we can get caught into that trap, and I've seen leaders do this. They get caught into those personality assessment traps where it's, well, this is who I am, and I can't change it, and so I just have to find someone to balance me, or you all have to learn to live with me. I actually had a leader do that. I think I might reference this in the leadership course, and I won't go into the full story, but we did these leadership assessments, and instead of taking the feedback of, okay, how can I develop and improve, she went to her team. And she was at a pretty high level in the organization. She was kind of an intimidating person. And she made copies of the assessment and put it in front of her team. And she said, this is the way I am. You all need to learn to live with me. That is not the intent. So I digressed a little bit there. I get on my soapbox about those things. But I bring it up because strategic thinking and strategy and things like that can come into those personality assessments. So if you've taken one of those and you find yourself in that category, maybe you didn't score real high in the strategy area, that's fine. You can still develop as a strategic leader and a strategic thinker. And you can develop, or maybe you were high in there and someone else on your team isn't. Well, you can develop them. It's, I view it like musical ability, athletic ability, other things. You may never be as good at that as someone else, but you can still develop, right? All right, so let's talk now about components to consider that fall into this area of strategic thinking and strategic leadership. And the first one, several components that I want to look at here are strategic thinking characteristics. So if you've got the PowerPoint there, I should have said that already. Make sure you have that there ready to look at or pulled up. But strategic thinking characteristics, and this, there's several of them here. I'm going to kind of walk through these, and this is thinking, not leadership, but again, they tie together. First one is research. I think it's so important that as we're going about this area of strategy, strategic thinking, being strategic leaders, we have to be research oriented. Now, you're in a doctoral program, so you are in a research mode right now. And the truth of the matter is, some of you walked into the doctoral program already wired towards a research kind of a mind. Others of you, not as much, and you're developing that skill and that ability right now, and that's fine. And I'm not necessarily talking about, APA format, document everything research in these kind of contexts. But the research mindset that I think of when it comes to strategic thinking, strategic leadership is you're always asking more questions. You're always, I wonder about, what if we follow this line of thought? What if we, or if you will, pull on this thread a little bit? I think of the old TV series Columbo, the detective. And if you've never seen that, depending on your age bracket, and I was very young when Columbo was on, but played by Peter Falk. And he was always kind of rumpled, and he talked kind of like this. But Columbo he always kind of knew who the person was, and then he would, get him entrapped in there. But Columbo, especially when he was talking to the person who was guilty of the crime, he'd ask him and kind of give off this air of bumbling idiot and stuff, and then he'd start to leave the room, and he'd always turn around. A lot of times he had a cigar in his hand, his rumpled trench coat, and he'd, just one more question. And usually it was a zinger, right? It's kind of the one that got to the heart, that showed this person, the detective knows it was me. But we need to be that way as strategic thinkers and strategic leaders. We need to have that kind of Columbo mindset where there's always just one more question. Now, that can be taken to an extreme. At some point, you got to cut it off and just move on. Some of you may have had that feedback from me or from your dissertation chair when it comes to your lit review, right? At some point, okay, you got enough. Now let's just move forward, because we got to get the ball moving on the dissertation. But you need to have that mindset as a strategic thinker. Let's do some research. And we may talk about this more a little bit later in the semester, but there's an idea of scenario planning. I won't go into that right now. But what I learned from studying scenario planning is we need to make sure we're researching far and wide. I think a lot of times when we do strategy and we do strategic thinking in our organizations, we will do research just about our field or our product or whatever, rather than looking very wide. What's going on? Cultural trends, things like that. With coronavirus, and rather than just focusing on the illness itself, for those of us in higher ed, what's this going to mean for a higher ed going forward? We have economic problems. Is that going to be a downturn or an upswing in enrollment? A lot of students are experiencing online learning for the first time. Some of those are in high school, and they're going to be making decisions about college. Are they going to now pick online learning? Or are they going to be, my kids are not enjoying online learning. I mean, they're doing it, it's fine, but they're not really enjoying it. But at the same time, one could argue it's not high quality, right? I'm getting off track. Anyway, you understand we need to be researching from far and wide and thinking through these things. And that really ties into that next one, which is analytical thinking. Analyzing then the information that's in front of us, that information that we gather, that research, and thinking through it from all angles. Really holding up that question, that problem, that data, that information, and turning it around and looking at it from all angles. That's analytical thinking. The next one then is innovation. And this is, I love the fact that this list includes innovation, because once again, we could probably, if I asked you to jot down before you saw this, if I would have asked you, hey, put together a list of components or characteristics that you think go with strategic thinking, I would almost bet that research and analysis, or as we say here, analytical thinking, you probably would have showed up on pretty much everybody, if not everybody's list, right? Those are kind of no-brainers when it comes to strategic thinking. But I like innovation because it reminds us, I think, to stay on the balls of our feet, if you will. Because, and this is what I was talking about, too often we think of strategy as we plan it, we start it off, and then you just let it play out. And that's not the case. We have to be ready to innovate and adapt while we're doing the planning, but even ongoing as we shift and adjust. An illustration that I use when I talk about strategic thinking and strategic planning, and you'll probably hear me use this illustration again when we start breaking down into goals and objectives. But think about, and I'll use it broadly right now, sports teams. A sports team, whether that's college or professional, they have an overarching goal and objective, right? It might be to be, for college football, a consistently top 10 team. That's their overarching goal. And then they have a strategy on how to get there. They also have strategies for individual games. Those are the game plans. The coach will analyze the film of the opposing team, and they develop their plan. But any good coach will tell you, you've got to shift and adapt and change within the game, right? Because the other team's going to be throwing different stuff at you too. And so that's where that innovation aspect comes in, and I think it's so important. And we too often forget about it when it comes to strategic thinking. And the next one then, problem-solving skills. Because the fact of the matter is, as we do our thinking, as we do our planning within the strategy arena, we're going to run into hurdles. We're going to run into obstacles. We're going to run into problems. And so how do we solve them? How do we think through them? Sorry for another movie reference, but, I use them a lot. I think they're great teaching tools. But the old Pixar, one of the very first Pixar movies was Bug's Life. I think Toy Story was the first one. I think Bug's Life may have been second. So it's an oldie but a goodie. But if you remember in Bug's Life, in very early in the movie, one of the opening scenes, the ants are collecting their food. And they're going along, right? And the leaf falls. And it falls in the middle of their line. And all of a sudden there's panic. And the ants like, it's a leaf! What do we do? And the other, one of the older ants jumps in. One of the bodies, he's like, you step around the leaf. Move around the leaf. And I think that's how we are too often with our strategy. And that goes to innovation and problem-solving skills. There's a leaf in the way. Now we got a problem. Well, I guess we just quit. What do I do? And we become paralyzed because now our plan is interrupted. Because for the ants, their plan was follow the ant in front of you and you march on and you deliver the food. We need to be able to step in and step around the leaf. Those are our problem-solving skills that are coming in. And this is where I get really excited when we talk about these things, because especially with problem-solving skills, I think this is where we have a great chance, if we're being that leader, to help show other leaders how to think through this. I love doing this even with my own kids. As they face problems in life. And I mean, understand what I'm saying here. I don't sit down and analyze them, but, or, you know, I like to help them think through their problems. Now, sometimes problems don't, you know, from kids, understand what I'm saying here. They don't need to be thought through. They just need you to hug them and tell them it's okay, right? But what I'm talking about is, you know, a math problem, or they run into, you know, a problem with a friend. I like to help them think through those problems because something has interrupted their goal. And they're like, Dad, what should I do? Okay. Well, I'm not going to answer that for you right away. Now, when they were little, I did. But they're all teenagers now and above. And I like to ask them questions and coach them through it and help them develop problem-solving skills. Why? Because if I train them to always ask me what they should do, I've got 4 kids. And as they become adults, we all know the problems only get harder. I'm going to be exhausted. I will have a full-time job just solving problems for my kids, let alone my own problems. So I need to develop them as problem solvers. Think through what's the problem, what's the hiccup, what's the hurdle, how do we get around it? That's what we do as strategic leaders. We demonstrate those skills and we help others think through them. So then the next one is communication. And of course, when I saw this list and I was putting it together, by the way, this is not a list from me specifically. It's actually from a website that where I got the definition of strategic thinking. It's the Center for Management Organization Effectiveness. I should have put that credit there on that slide, but this is a list from them. And you know, I mentioned innovation, and I was glad to see that. But when I saw communication and leadership skills, you know, my heart really sang at that point because that's me. That's my background, leadership and communication. And they had them lumped together. I put them apart because to me they're too different. They tie in very well together, but I don't think it's communication and leadership. I think there's communication skills and there's leadership skills. But for sake of time, I'm going to talk about them together. And I do think it's so important that as we're going through this that we know how to communicate well. And communication, remember, isn't just me speaking and you hearing and then, you know, hopefully you understand. Communication is also listening. And so I think that's important as strategic leaders, that we are demonstrating how to listen to others. Because part of strategy, part of strategic thinking, part of strategic planning and all of that is being able to listen to a wide variety of ideas and opinions and perspectives, and then be able to think through that, analyze that as we've got this research, and then come up with the best plan that we think for moving forward. But I got to know how to listen, and I also know how to be able to. I need to know how to communicate clearly my ideas both ways, and so communication is so vital. Not to mention just the whole idea, and we'll get into this more probably when we talk about organizational change at the end of the semester. But communication is so vital when we're dealing with organizational change, I'll leave it at that. And then leadership skills, and a prime leadership skill is developing others and influencing others and helping them see this. And we're going to be talking about leadership throughout the semester. And then decisiveness. At some point, we've got to make a decision. At some point, we have to be able to take all of this data that we've analyzed and thought through and put together and say, here's our decision. We can become paralyzed with information. You know, we always called it at State Farm analysis paralysis. You've probably heard that term before. But it seemed like some of our leaders were particularly bad about it there. You know, I need more information. We need to analyze. And it was like, at some point you gotta just make a decision here. And so that's an important part of strategic thinking. And then the final slide here, and just spend a few minutes, our last few minutes here in this lecture, talking about it. And the book talks about it a lot, and they work it in to the various chapters. But I do want to reference it here, and they use that acronym for our world right now of VUCA, And you see that it comes from that military area. But we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And it's interesting to me that the book was written 2014-ish, I think. So it's 6-ish years old at this point, and yet that's even more true now. Volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. I mean, think about, as I'm recording this, and probably, you're watching it this summer, and hopefully by the time you're watching it, things are starting to open up, if safe, right? But it could very well be that, this is going to go on for a while. The truth of the matter is, to a certain extent, nobody knows in regard to coronavirus. And, this is a prime example of VUCA. How many, if you're an instructor, a face-to-face instructor, how many of you thought halfway through the spring semester of 2020, you would have to, within a week to 2 week window, shift everything to an online format? As you started the semester, I would venture to guess probably none of you were planning that. I would venture to guess hardly any, if any, college administrators were planning on making that shift. Yet, that's exactly what happened. And so, that just shows you how that is characteristic of our world. Our world is volatile. And understand, when I say our world, that can be big, our world, but that can also be small, our world, meaning the world that you live in, your department. Things are volatile all around us. And students can get sick, or faculty can get sick, or things can happen. And so we just have to be aware of that. And how does that impact? Sorry, it froze up there for a minute. I don't know if it did for you or not, but how does the volatility in the world impact us? And we have to be ready to adjust to that. It's uncertain. We don't know. And again, we're there. Are we going to have a traditional school year next year? Already, well, this program is online, so it's not a big difference. But, already here at the end of April, Clarkson College and most colleges have made the decision for summer. Everything's going to be online again. And now there's talk of, hey, we need to be preparing to offer everything online in the fall, because that may be required. So we have a lot of uncertainty. College athletics are very uncertain. Are we going to, college football, are we going to have a season next year? We don't know. And so it just shows that complex. There is a difference between complicated and complex. And a friend of mine put it this way, and I appreciated the distinction he drew. A computer is complicated, right? I don't understand how all a computer works. It's complicated. But I can take courses and I can take classes if I have the desire to, and I can figure out how to take my computer apart and put it back together and figure it out, right? Just like a car engine. That's complicated, but I can figure it out. Complex is, bad English, is people. We are complex. Situations are complex because they're always changing and shifting, and we never know exactly, we don't, as much as I reference movies and TV shows, those are all scripted, right? So I know what the other character is going to say. Our lives aren't scripted. And I can go into a situation and not know how this is going to play out. And so there is complexity and ambiguity with that. And I think, an example of that right now is, so none of us were expecting this to hit halfway through the spring semester. It did, and people have made adjustments, and there's still some adjustments going on. And I mentioned just a second ago, we don't know how long this is going to last. But the other big question that I have is, are we preparing for life after quarantine? And I would ask that of individuals, but I mean as organizations. I was talking with a colleague who, they have a commute, and they said, I've really enjoyed not having to drive. I think this could change how organizations function. I think they're finding a lot of work can get done in a virtual format. Now, not everything, and it's not ideal for certain people and things like that. But there's going to be some shifts and changes coming out of it. And are we thinking through that? Or are our organizations planning for life after quarantine? That's just an example, because we think this has created volatility and uncertainty and complexity and ambiguity. We have that coming out the other end. It isn't, we aren't going to go back to January 2020 as it was, if you know what I mean. We can't. Everyone has changed as a result of this. And so what's that going to look like? Those are the kind of things that as a strategic leader, as a strategic thinker, we're figuring out. So that'll conclude our week 1 lectures. And we will, for Module 2, I'm pulling out my notes here. For Module 2, we're going to start getting into the elements of strategic leadership and focus in particular on mission and vision statements. What those are, why are they so important for organizations? How do we analyze if they're a good one or not, and things like that. So we will see you in Module 2.